Multiple protesters calling for a ceasefire in Gaza repeatedly interrupted Secretary of State Antony Blinken's testimony yesterday at a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing on Israel.
Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today.
Populated areas. Stop supporting the genocide and ethnic cleansing of the people of Gaza. Ceasefire now! Save the children of Gaza! Save the children of Gaza!
Not in the face of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Not in the face of an intensifying strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific and around the world.
If the witness will suspend, and I ask that everyone again respect this hearing, we will suspend until the room is cleared.
Is calling for a ceasefire. Shame on you all. The world is calling for a ceasefire. The American people don't want to support this brutal war. Stop the war. Stop the ceasefire now. Stop funding this brutal massacre that Israel is doing on the people of Gaza. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now.
Each time a protester was escorted out of the hearing by police, Blinken would then resume his testimony, just to be interrupted by another protester.
It's helped make sure that Russia's invasion and strategic...
Committee will suspend.
Joining us now to discuss is someone who was in the room when this all happened. Code Pink co-founder Medea Benjamin joins us now. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Nice to be with you.
So what is your goal in, and you were one of the people protesting there, what are you hoping to achieve?
We wanted to send a strong message to Secretary of State Blinken, Secretary Austin, as well as to the senators and, of course, the American people, that while 66% of Americans want to have a ceasefire, that is not something that the Biden administration is calling for, and there is not one senator in the entire Senate that is calling for a ceasefire. So we thought it was important to get this message out that we are appalled that the U.S. has given the green light to Israel to bomb the civilians of Gaza and is now asking for $14 billion more after giving almost $4 billion a year of our tax money to create this very oppressive system that has led to this conflict. So we're glad that we had a chance to speak up. We're hearing from people around the world that say that they are relieved to see that there are people in the United States. And of course, they've seen the many protests that have been happening all around this country, organized by Jewish groups, by Muslim groups, by all kinds of organizations. So I think we just have to increase the pressure on our Congress and our administration if we're going to get our voices heard in a more effective way.
You mentioned that not a single senator has supported a ceasefire. A number of senators have advocated for a humanitarian pause, but the word ceasefire seemed to be unsayable among this crew, even among progressives like Bernie Sanders. I do wonder the extent to which Code Pink has reached out to his office and what, if anything, you've heard from his team about why this seems to be a line in the sand for senators.
Yes, we've been going to Bernie Sanders' office on a regular basis. There were people arrested in his office last week. And we've been going to the offices of members of the House as well, including sit-ins in the offices of progressive members of the House. And we find that they are very reluctant. In fact, there's only 18 members of the House that have signed on to Cori Bush's very simple resolution calling for a ceasefire. Some of them have put out their own individual statements, which is something we are also encouraging. This issue of a humanitarian pause is better than nothing, but it really just means stop the bombing while we send some aid in, and then we'll continue bombing them as well. The best thing we can do is to keep people alive, to stop the bombing and the land invasion. And we know that every 10 minutes there is a child who is being killed. That's why our message was save the children of Gaza. And we don't understand why that is so hard for people in Congress. Of course, there is the impact of the pro-Zionist lobby, like the AIPAC lobby. There is the influence of the weapons industry. And there is this long-term connection that so many, including Biden himself, have had with Israel. But at a time like this, it's important to bring out the humanity of people who are supposed to be representing us and say, let's stop the killing of all of these children and innocent civilians.
I'm just curious, how were you treated when you were removed from that protest by the security personnel who did that?
Well, my arm is hurting from being pulled out, but I must say that the Capitol Police are quite professional. They held us for a couple of hours. They charged us a fine. And then if you didn't have any priors, people were let go. They have seen a lot of protests in the last couple of weeks. There were over 300 that were arrested in the Cannon Rotunda in that massive protest that the progressive Jewish community put on. So they are actually not only professional, but a lot of them, I think, are sympathetic. We're finding a lot of sympathy within Congress. There are people who are walking around draped in Palestinian flags or wearing keffiyehs, and they're getting thumbs up from the staff. When we go into some of the offices, we are thanked profusely from some of the staff. There is this anonymous letter that you've probably talked about, written by over 400 members of the staff in the Congress. So I think there is a growing sentiment within not only the Congress, but within the State Department, where we have a number of friends who say they're extremely unhappy with the U.S. position.
When Blinken was talking about the importance of abiding by the rules of war during the hearing, one protester had this to say.
The President and I have both stressed the need for Israel to operate by the rule.
Why are we handcuffing and arresting them? These are
Committee will
the people of
suspend.
compassion. Let them be at the table. Why aren't they at the table? Ceasefire now! I beg you! Ceasefire now!
Secretary Blinken, you may continue.
Thank you, Chair. So I was saying the President and I have both stressed in our conversation.
And here is what Secretary Blinken had to say in response to the protesters in the room.
I also hear very much the passions expressed in this room and outside this room. All of us are committed to the protection of civilian life. All of us know the suffering that is taking place as we speak. All of us are determined to see it end. But all of us know the imperative of standing up with our allies and partners when their security, when their democracies are threatened.
Regarding his thoughts on a ceasefire that so many protesters are adamantly calling for, Blinken said this.
When it comes to a ceasefire, in this moment, you're exactly right. That would simply consolidate what Hamas has been able to do and allow it to remain where it is and potentially repeat what it did another day. And that's not tolerable. No nation would tolerate it. We do believe that we have to consider things like humanitarian pauses to make sure that assistance can get to those who need it and that people can be protected and get out of harm's way. But we can't have a situation where there's a reversion to the status quo, where when this is over, it goes back to Hamas being responsible for the governance and so-called security of Gaza, because that's simply an invitation to repeat what happened. And again, no nation would tolerate that.
So how do you respond to his contention there that if there was a ceasefire, it would just allow Hamas to consolidate its position, to regroup, and to plot further violence against Israelis?
Well, one, we need a ceasefire to protect the lives of civilians, and Blinken is just such a hypocrite when he says the U.S. is working to make sure that civilian lives are being protected, because they're not. The Israelis are just hit the Jabalia refugee camp, which is full of civilians. The other thing is that this bombing is actually creating more recruits for Hamas and probably more radical groups like Islamic Jihad. We are seeing parents say that they can't control their teenage sons who are saying that this has created so much hatred for Israel that they want to join and take revenge in whatever way they can. So every day this goes on, Israel is creating more people who have an intense hatred towards Israel. The only way to solve this is really getting at the root causes. I have been to Gaza 7 times, and I know the horrific circumstances in which the people of Gaza have been living. And unless there is some real attention to, are we serious about a 2-state solution? And if so, how are they going to get rid of the hundreds of thousands of settlers who are on Palestinian lands? Or are they serious about a 1-state democratic country in which there are equal rights for all? And how in the world is that going to be created when you have these extremists in the Israeli government? So Israel has created Hamas. We know they have supported Hamas over the years to divide the Palestinian leadership. Israel is creating more terrorists every day that it bombs Gaza.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, we've been covering some of the rise in settler violence in the West Bank. That's Israeli settlers who have, in many cases, been armed by the Israeli government and who have taken this opportunity or this the reality of troops being redeployed from that area to Gaza to have a kind of a free-for-all. There have been reported video evidence of abuse of Palestinians that have evoked Abu Ghraib and the abuses of our own U.S. military during the Iraq War. So it is very difficult to watch this all pan out. And I'm curious to know how likely you think the kind of discussion that Joe Biden is initiating about a 2-state solution is to actually pan out in light of that settler violence.
I think it's very unlikely. I just don't see how this is going to pan out. One thing I do think that the administration is having grave concern is, will this spread into a regional war? Will Hezbollah get involved? What will happen with Iran, Syria? There are so many groups around Israel that are feeling that, wondering how long they can stay out of this fight. And yet the administration does not want to see this extend to a regional war. And that means they're going to have to stop the Israeli government. So it's a tremendous bind for the administration. In the meantime, they're just asking for more and more money to solidify the Israeli hold over Palestinian lives, Palestinian land. And the opposition is growing all around the world. We see the call for the ceasefire coming from the Secretary General and coming from the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of countries around the world. And it's also a question how long the repressive leaders of the Arab world can keep their people in check, because there is so much anger growing every day when they see the conditions. They're watching things like Al Jazeera. They're seeing the horrific suffering of people on the ground. And I don't think this can go on for very long without a real uprising in many countries in the region.
Leah Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. I just want to say that the one thing that we can do is put more pressure on our members of Congress and to get out in the streets and the protests. So I hope people will join us on Saturday, a big protest in Washington, D.C., 2 p.m., starting at Freedom Plaza.
More Rising right after this.